The thread between us, a quiet love story of vulnerability and trust. It's funny how the smallest things can leave the deepest impressions on your heart. Sometimes, it's a glance in a crowded room or a conversation that should have been ordinary but turns into something far more meaningful. It was that way with us, wasn't it? We didn't know it at first, but we were already tangled in the thread between us long before either of us admitted it. The spark that ignited a fire was almost imperceptible, hidden under layers of mundane routines. It all started when we were just strangers passing through each other's lives. I remember the first time I saw you clearly. Though I could have sworn I'd noticed you long before. I had been running late, rushing to get a coffee before work, when you walked in. You weren't even trying to stand out, but somehow you did. There was something magnetic about you. The way you moved, the way you didn't rush, as if you knew the world was going to wait for you. You stood there, almost too calm for the chaotic energy around you. And that calmness pulled me in like gravity. We didn't speak that day. You were engrossed in a book, your head slightly tilted as if you were immersed in another world. I couldn't help but steal a few glances your way. It was a familiar feeling. I had been around people my whole life, but somehow you felt different. You weren't the type of person that instantly opened up, but there was something inviting about you. Something that made me wonder if you ever let anyone close enough to see who you really were. It wasn't until the following week that we spoke, and it wasn't planned. I had been walking through the park, trying to clear my mind from the stress of work when I spotted you again. This time, you weren't alone. You were sitting on a bench, chatting with a friend, but the way you laughed caught my attention. There was something real about it, not the forced politeness I was used to hearing. It was genuine, unguarded. Without thinking, I approached you. I hadn't even planned to, but my legs moved faster than my mind. You looked up, caught my eyes for a brief moment, and smiled. "Hey, I've seen you around. You come to this park often?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but the nervousness in my voice betrayed me. It wasn't like me to start conversations with strangers, but there was something about you that made me want to try. You looked at me for a second, your eyes calculating, but you didn't shy away. Instead, you chuckled softly, a little surprised. "Yeah, I come here when I need a break from everything. It's the one place that makes me feel like I'm still connected to something real." Your voice had this softness to it that made everything else seem so far away, as though the world was on mute and it was just the two of us in that moment. I sat down next to you. It was strange how comfortable it felt. There we were, two strangers who had exchanged barely a few words, yet in that silence, I already felt like I had known you longer. We talked for hours that afternoon. About trivial things, mostly. Books we liked, places we wanted to visit, our favorite foods. There was no rush, no pressure to fit into a mold. It was just conversation, simple but real. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could just be myself. But as much as I tried to tell myself that this was just a chance encounter, I couldn't stop thinking about you. You lingered in my thoughts long after I left that day. It wasn't infatuation, at least not in the way people usually talk about it. It was something more. A quiet pull, a subtle sense that something important had started between us without either of us realizing it at first. The days passed, and our paths crossed more often than I expected. It became a routine of sorts. You'd be in the park, in the cafe, or walking down the street just when I needed a break from my own life. We never said anything about it, but I knew you were waiting for me to show up as much as I was waiting to see you. And then one day, you finally said it. "You know, I've been wondering, why do we always end up at the same places?" You asked, a playful smile dancing on your lips. It was one of those questions that didn't need an answer, but it left me thinking. "I don't know," I said, trying to sound lighthearted. "Maybe we're just on the same wavelength." You paused, looking at me like you were trying to figure out what I really meant. Then you nodded, as if you understood something I hadn't even said. From then on, we saw more of each other, without needing an excuse. I learned that you were more than the quiet, reflective person I had initially thought you were. You had layers, deep ones, hidden behind the calm exterior you wore. It wasn't long before I started seeing through those layers, uncovering more about you with each conversation, each shared experience. And so it went. We started to meet more frequently, in the park, at the cafe, and sometimes even just for walks after work. We learned about each other's routines, our dreams, our regrets. I discovered how you had grown up in a small town, far from the hustle and bustle of the city, and how that shaped the way you viewed life. You learned about my own struggles, how I'd always felt a little out of place, like I was just waiting for the right moment to fit in. But the more we shared, the more I realized that we were both hiding something. There were parts of us we weren't ready to show, shadows we kept tucked away. I could see it in the way you hesitated when certain topics came up, in the way your smile would falter just slightly. But you didn't push me away, and I didn't ask too many questions. Until that night, the night that changed everything. We were walking through the park again, the sun already setting behind us, casting long shadows over the path. The air was cool but not cold, just enough to make you pull your jacket tighter around you. "Can I ask you something?" you said suddenly, your voice a little quieter than usual. "Of course," I replied, my heart beginning to race, though I wasn't sure why. You stopped walking, turning to face me. "Oh, why do we keep coming back to each other? What is it about this, about us, that makes it feel like we're supposed to be here?" The question hung in the air between us, charged with something more than curiosity. I didn't know how to answer. What could I say? That I didn't know either, but that it felt like we were slowly becoming woven into each other's lives without either of us realizing it. That somehow, everything about this connection felt like fate, even if we didn't have the words for it. I looked at you, searching for an answer, but all I found was the quiet certainty in your eyes. The thread between us had already begun to tie itself into something I wasn't sure I could break. And maybe, in that moment, I didn't even want to. And so, in the quiet of the evening, with the city lights flickering in the distance, and the weight of your question lingering in the air, we stood there, two people who had unknowingly and unwillingly become bound together by something greater than both of us. Something that would change the course of everything. The days that followed that moment felt like a blur, each one folding into the next with an ease that I couldn't explain. The question you'd asked hung in the air between us, unspoken but ever present. Why do we keep coming back to each other? It was a question that seemed simple enough, but every time I thought about it, I found myself lost in the complexity of it. What were we really doing? Was this connection just a fleeting moment or something more? We hadn't discussed it again, not directly. Instead, we let the silence take over, letting our presence speak for itself. Each meeting seemed more natural than the last, and in a way, I stopped questioning the was. It felt as if this, whatever this was, had always been meant to happen. I no longer wondered about fate or timing. Instead, I focused on the way you made me feel, the way we could talk for hours without ever running out of things to say. The comfort that came with your presence was unlike anything I'd experienced before. But even though we were getting closer, I could still feel the distance between us in subtle ways. You would smile, but I could see the hesitation in your eyes. There were moments when I'd catch you lost in thought, your gaze far away, like you were somewhere else. Somewhere I couldn't reach. And I wanted to. I wanted to understand what lay behind that wall you kept so carefully built. One afternoon, we met at the cafe again, a place that had become our own little refuge. It was raining outside, the kind of gentle rain that made everything look hazy. You were already there when I arrived, sitting by the window, your face soft as you watched the drops race down the glass. I couldn't help but notice how serene you looked, and for a second, I wondered what thoughts were running through your mind. Mind if I join you? I asked, standing by the table, unsure if I should interrupt the peaceful moment. You looked up, your eyes meeting mine with that familiar calm. Oh, of course not. I was waiting for you. I sat down across from you, a small smile tugging at my lips. What are you thinking about? I asked, unable to resist the pull to understand what lay behind that guarded expression. You shrugged slightly, a soft chuckle escaping your lips. Just everything and nothing. The rain does that to me, I guess. You paused, looking down at the coffee in front of you. I don't know why, but it's like the world gets quieter when it rains. Like it's giving me a break from everything. I leaned back in my chair, watching you closely. A break from what? You hesitated before answering, and for a moment I could see the weight in your eyes. But then you looked at me again, and the wall was back in place. From everything that doesn't matter, you said softly. I could sense that there was more to it. There was always more to you than you were willing to let on. And it was frustrating, but at the same time, I understood. I wasn't ready to fully open up either, not yet. But as we sat there, surrounded by the comforting sound of rain against the window and the quiet hum of the kaffa, I felt something shift between us. It wasn't just the usual warmth I had grown accustomed to. It was something deeper, something that pulled at me in ways I couldn't explain. You know, you began, your voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes, I think I understand things better when I'm alone, when it's just me and my thoughts. But then, I meet someone like you, and everything changes. It's like I'm seeing things for the first time, but I don't know if I'm ready for that. I felt my chest tighten at your words. It wasn't just the vulnerability in your tone. It was the truth, the rawness of it. You weren't just afraid of being close to someone. You were afraid of what that closeness would reveal, what it would change in both of us. And I couldn't deny that I felt the same way. We had both been living in our own little worlds, carrying around pieces of ourselves that no one had ever truly seen. But now, those pieces were slowly being laid bare, and it was terrifying. Maybe we don't have to be ready, I said, my voice steady despite the sudden vulnerability that flooded me. Maybe we just have to be here, right now, and figure it out as we go along. You looked at me for a long moment, your gaze intense as if searching for something. I wasn't sure what it was, but I hoped I had given you something you needed. Something real. I think I like that, you said finally. Your smile returning, though this time it was softer. Maybe we'll figure it out together. We didn't talk much more after that. There was no need for words. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful, even with all the things unsaid hanging in the air. It was a comfortable kind of quiet, the kind that only happens when you truly understand each other without needing to speak. But as the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were approaching something we weren't ready for. The thread between us was getting tighter, pulling us closer, and I could feel it in every conversation, every touch, every moment we shared. And just when I thought we might be able to ride the wave of this connection without facing the inevitable, you said something that stopped me in my tracks. It was a few days later, on another rainy afternoon, when we were walking down the same path in the park we had walked down so many times before. The world was quiet again, just us and the sound of the rain. And then, out of nowhere, you turned to me and asked the question that had been on my mind ever since that first moment we spoke. Do you think we're meant to be together? I stopped walking, taken aback by the question. My heart raced in my chest as I struggled to find the right words. Was this the moment? The moment where everything shifted, where we had to face the truth of what was happening between us? I don't know, I said, my voice faltering. But I don't think it matters. Maybe it's not about being meant to be together. Maybe it's about being here now, in this moment, and seeing where it takes us. You didn't say anything for a long time, just standing there, looking at me with that quiet intensity. And in that silence, I realized that maybe that was enough. Maybe it wasn't about the future, about figuring out whether we were meant to be together. Maybe it was about the simple truth that we had found each other at the right time, and that was all we needed. Yeah? You finally said, your voice soft. Maybe it's just about being here. And just like that, I knew we were already more than we had been when we first met. The thread between us had already woven itself so tightly, and there was no going back. Whatever was meant to come, we would face it together. And in that moment, that was all that mattered. The days that followed felt like a quiet unfolding, each moment stretching out with a sort of suspended animation, as if time itself had slowed down just to give us space. There was something about the way we existed together, the ease with which we moved in and out of each other's lives, that made everything feel inevitable. As though we had both unknowingly been preparing for this moment, for this connection, long before we even met. But even with that quiet certainty growing between us, there was always an undercurrent of tension, a whisper of something we were both avoiding. It wasn't a tangible thing, not something you could put your finger on, but it was there, in the way you sometimes looked at me like you were afraid of getting too close, of revealing too much. It was in the way I would sometimes catch myself holding back, unsure of how much to give, how much to share. Neither of us was ready to truly expose ourselves, to fully open up. But it wasn't just that. It was the fear of what it would mean if we did. I remember the first time we kissed. It wasn't planned. We had just finished walking around the city, letting the cool night air wrap itself around us. Both of us talking and laughing like we had done so many times before. But this time, there was something different in the way we moved, in the way we looked at each other. It was more than just the comfortable silence we had shared for weeks. It was as if we had both been holding our breath, waiting for the right moment. It happened so naturally, without warning. We had reached the park, the same park where we had first met, and we had stopped by the fountain. The sound of water was soothing, calming. For a moment, neither of us spoke, simply standing there, side by side, letting the quiet of the night settle around us. And then, without thinking, you reached out and touched my hand. It was such a simple gesture, but in that moment, it felt like the entire world shifted. I looked at you, and you were looking back at me, and for the first time, everything felt clear. There was no more hesitation, no more wondering whether we were meant to be here. We simply were. And in that moment, I understood. You stepped closer, your hand still in mine, and I felt my pulse quicken, not from nervousness, but from something deeper, something more real. And then, without saying a word, you kissed me. It wasn't rushed, wasn't forced. It was slow, deliberate, as if we were both savoring the moment, letting it wash over us. The world around us disappeared, leaving only the feeling of your lips on mine, the warmth of your touch, the sense of something more beginning to grow between us. When the kiss ended, neither of us moved right away. We just stood there, still close, taking it all in. There was no need for words. We both knew. It was the beginning of something new, something that was beyond anything we had ever imagined. But after that night, things changed. It wasn't immediate, but it was undeniable. The distance that had once been there, unspoken but palpable, had lessened, but in its place, there was something else, uncertainty. It wasn't the kind of uncertainty that comes from not knowing someone, from still being in the process of getting to know each other. No, this was different. This uncertainty was deeper. It was the fear of what would happen next, of what this connection really meant. I noticed it in the way you sometimes pulled away, your eyes distant even when we were sitting together. I noticed it in the quiet pauses in our conversations, where the air between us would grow thick with unsaid things. You were holding something back, and I couldn't help but wonder if you were waiting for me to pull away first, or if you were waiting for the right moment to explain the things you hadn't said yet. It wasn't that we didn't want to be together. I could feel that in every touch, every shared laugh, every look we exchanged. But there was something else there, something we couldn't name, something that both of us were trying to ignore, even though we both knew it was there. It was a few weeks later, after one of our regular evening walks, that it happened. We had been talking about everything and nothing, like we usually did, and when we reached the spot by the fountain again, you stopped and looked at me in a way that made my heart skip a beat. There was a softness in your gaze, but also something deeper, something heavier. "I've been thinking," you said, your voice almost too quiet to hear. "About us. About everything." I felt a knot form in my stomach. My mind raced, trying to figure out what you meant. Did you feel the same way I did? Was this the moment when you would tell me that you were ready, that you had let go of whatever it was that had been holding you back? You turned to face me fully, your hands clasped together in front of you as if you were trying to hold yourself steady. "I don't want to rush this," you continued, "but I can't keep pretending that I'm not feeling something more. And I can't ignore it anymore, not with you. But I'm scared. I'm scared of what it means, of what I might be giving up, of what happens if I let myself fall for you." The words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't the confession I had been waiting for. It was something deeper, something raw and vulnerable that I hadn't been prepared for. And yet, in that moment, I understood. You were afraid, just like I had been, just like we both had been. We were afraid of what would happen when the thread that connected us finally tightened enough to pull us together. "I'm scared too," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "But I'm also here. I'm here because I want this. I want you. And I don't know what happens next, but I can't keep pretending like I don't feel this pull between us." There was silence between us then, the weight of our confessions settling into the air. But this time, it wasn't heavy with doubt or fear. It was heavy with understanding. We had both acknowledged what had been simmering beneath the surface, what had been unspoken for so long. And in that silence, something changed. I could see it in your eyes. The walls you had built up, the barriers you had kept between us, were starting to crumble. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but it was real. We were both letting go of our fears, of the uncertainty that had kept us apart, and allowing ourselves to step into something new. And so, we stood there by the fountain, the rain falling softly around us, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from having all the answers, from knowing exactly what comes next. It was the peace that comes from accepting the unknown, from stepping forward even when the path ahead is unclear. We weren't perfect. We hadn't figured everything out. But in that moment, it didn't matter. The thread that connected us was growing stronger with every step we took together, and no matter how much we tried to fight it, we both knew that there was no turning back. "I'm not going anywhere," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. You smiled then, a soft, genuine smile, and for the first time, I saw the real you. The part of you that had been hidden all this time, the part that was willing to take a chance, to step into the unknown with me. And in that moment, I knew we were ready, not for all the answers, but for whatever came next, together. The days after that night by the fountain were a strange mix of clarity and confusion. It was as though we had crossed some invisible threshold, one that left us standing on the edge of something we couldn't fully understand. We had confessed our fears, admitted that we were both scared, but the words had somehow made it clearer than ever we were in this together, whether we understood what this was or not. And that made all the difference. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. We were moving forward, but it wasn't like the rush of a storm. It was a slow and steady current, like the river carving its path through the earth, always flowing, always shaping. It felt right, but it was still fragile, like something that could easily break if we weren't careful. We spent more time together, just as we had before, but now everything had a new layer to it. Every glance, every touch, carried a weight that hadn't been there before. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable to anyone else, but to us, it was everything. I found myself paying closer attention to the little things. How your eyes lit up when you talked about your dreams, the way your hand would brush against mine when you thought I wasn't looking, the soft laugh that seemed to escape you whenever you were nervous or unsure. You weren't the type to let your guard down easily, and I wasn't either. But I began to see more of you, and with every moment, I felt myself falling deeper into the web that was being woven between us. At times, it scared me. It wasn't because I didn't want it. It was because I knew I couldn't stop it. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I feared that the deeper I went, the more I'd have to lose. The deeper we went, the more there was to risk. But you were there, always present, always grounding me. We didn't need to talk about it. We didn't need to say the words that might have felt too heavy, too permanent. We were figuring it out as we went along, and for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. It was one evening, a few weeks after our conversation by the fountain, when the first real test of our connection came. It wasn't anything big, nothing earth-shattering, but it was enough to make us both pause, to make us both question where we stood. We had been out to dinner, a quiet little restaurant tucked away in the corner of the city. It was one of those places where the noise of the world seemed to fade away as soon as you walked in. The candlelight flickered between us, casting soft shadows on the table. It was an ordinary night, but there was something in the air, something unspoken that made it feel different. As we talked, I couldn't help but notice how you seemed distracted. Your eyes would drift to the window every few seconds, and you seemed lost in thought. It wasn't unusual for you to get quiet sometimes, but this felt different. This wasn't just your usual reserved nature. This was something else. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice tentative, unsure if I was reading too much into the silence. You looked at me then, your gaze sharp but distant, as though you had only just realized I was there. "Yeah, I'm fine," you said, but the words felt rehearsed, like you were trying to convince yourself as much as me. I didn't push it. Not immediately. I knew you'd talk when you were ready. But something inside me tightened, a knot I couldn't shake. It wasn't that I didn't trust you. It was that I could see something hidden beneath the surface, something you weren't ready to share. Dinner passed quietly after that, the conversation awkward in the way only unspoken thoughts can make it. By the time we left the restaurant, I could feel the tension between us, thicker than the quiet air around us. We walked side by side, but it felt like we were miles apart. The thread that had once connected us so effortlessly seemed to be stretched thin, fraying at the edges. When we reached the park, I stopped walking. The rain had stopped, but the clouds still hung low in the sky, casting a shadow over the path ahead. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. You paused beside me, your hands tucked into your pockets. For a moment, there was silence again, and I could see you struggling with your words, like you were trying to figure out how much to reveal. "Oh, I'm not sure what this is, what we're doing," you said, the words coming out in a rush. "It feels like we're getting closer, like things are changing, and I'm not sure I can keep up." The confession hit me harder than I expected. I had sensed the distance, but hearing it out loud made it real. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to reassure you, to tell you that everything would be okay, but I couldn't help but wonder if the same fears were inside me too. I wasn't sure what this was either. I wasn't sure what we were doing, but I knew I didn't want to lose us. "We don't have to have all the answers right now," I said, taking a step closer to you. "I don't know what this is either, but I want to be here with you, even if it's scary, even if we don't know what comes next." You looked at me then, your eyes searching mine as if looking for the truth in what I was saying. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel uncertain. I knew what I wanted. I didn't have the answers, but I knew I wanted to keep trying, to keep moving forward with you. I'm not asking for everything to be perfect, I continued. I'm just asking to keep going. Together, while you stood there for a moment, the weight of your thoughts hanging in the air between us. And then, slowly, you nodded. Okay, you whispered. Okay. It wasn't a grand declaration, but it was enough. It was enough to remind me that this wasn't about having it all figured out, about knowing exactly where we were headed. It was about taking it one step at a time, trusting that even if the road ahead was uncertain, we could walk it together. We stood there in the park, the night closing in around us, the world quiet except for the distant hum of the city. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was real, and sometimes that's all you need. As we walked back, side by side, I felt the thread between us tightening again, not in a way that felt suffocating, but in a way that felt right. The distance had been there, but it was already starting to shrink. The more we allowed ourselves to be vulnerable, to be honest, the stronger the connection became. We didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, I realized that maybe we didn't need them. What mattered was that we were in this together, whatever it was. And that was enough. The following weeks were both exhilarating and unsettling, as if we were both suspended in a delicate balance, teetering between the comfort of knowing we had something real and the fear that the threads connecting us could unravel at any moment. I had never thought about relationships in such a way before, but with you it was different. We weren't just moving through each day together, going through the motions. We were living in this space of unspoken tension, where every decision we made was a choice to stay, to hold on, or to let go. It wasn't that we were constantly on edge, but I could sense the fragility that lingered in every quiet moment. We had spoken about our fears, but talking about them didn't erase them. There was something still unknown between us, something we hadn't fully explored yet, and it was that uncertainty that made me second-guess every step we took forward. One afternoon, we were sitting in our usual cafe, the one with the cozy booths by the window. You were reading your book, as you often did, while I sipped my coffee, watching the world go by. It had become our little tradition, a moment of calm in the middle of the chaos that surrounded us. But today, there was an underlying tension, a crackling energy in the air that neither of us addressed, even though we both felt it. I shifted in my seat, trying to think of something to say, but words seemed too heavy for the moment. You weren't looking at me, but I could feel the quiet between us pulling at the edges of my thoughts. It was as though we were both waiting for something unspoken but undeniable. Do you ever wonder what would happen if we didn't do this? You asked suddenly, your voice soft but clear, cutting through the silence that had settled between us. I looked up, surprised by the question. What do you mean? If we didn't keep pushing forward, you continued, your eyes still fixed on the pages of your book. If we didn't keep trying to make this work, what if we just walked away? What would happen? The question hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know how to answer. It wasn't that I hadn't thought about it, I had. But hearing you say it out loud made it feel more real, more immediate. What would happen? Would we be okay? Could we walk away from something that had already started to feel like a part of us? I don't know, I said, my voice quiet. I think we'd always wonder what would have happened. I don't think we could just forget about it. About us. You finally looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time in what felt like ages. And what if we kept going, kept trying to make it work, and it all fell apart? What if we lose something in the process? I felt my heart tighten at the thought. I knew what you meant. The risk of losing it all was always there, hanging over us, like a dark cloud waiting to descend. But I couldn't imagine walking away from it either. The thought of losing what we had, what we were still building, felt like something I wasn't ready to face. I don't know what's going to happen, I said, my voice trembling slightly. But I don't want to lose this. Not yet. Not when it feels like we're finally getting somewhere. There was a long pause, the kind of silence that makes everything feel louder, as if the space between us is filled with all the things we haven't said yet. But this time, the silence didn't feel like a barrier. It felt like an invitation to understand each other, to make a choice together. You're right, you said softly, a small smile playing at the corners of your lips. I don't want to lose this either. And in that moment, something shifted. The weight of our unspoken fears, our uncertainties, didn't disappear, but it became easier to carry. We weren't perfect. We weren't guaranteed a smooth path ahead, but we were here together, and that was enough. That was more than enough. As the days passed, we began to settle into a new rhythm. We didn't have all the answers, and we still had our doubts, but we learned to trust in the process, to trust in each other. We took things day by day, sometimes by the hour, but always with the understanding that we were in this together. No matter what happened, we had made a choice to keep going. One evening, we decided to take a walk through the park again, the same park where it all began. The air was crisp, the kind of night that made you want to stay bundled up in layers, but the sky was clear, dotted with stars. It felt like the perfect night to just be. We walked in silence for a while, neither of us needing to speak. We had done this enough times now that the quiet felt comfortable. But then, without warning, you stopped and turned to me, your face serious in a way I hadn't seen before. I've been thinking, you said, your voice hesitant. About us. About everything. I stopped walking and looked at you, waiting for you to continue. I could sense that there was something important on your mind, something you were working up the courage to say. I don't want to scare you, you said, your eyes searching mine. But I need you to know something. My heart began to race, and I took a step closer, trying to read your expression. What is it? I'm not sure where this is going, you said, your voice shaky. But I want to be honest with you. I'm scared. I'm scared of getting too attached, of letting myself fall too deeply into something that might not work out. But the more I'm with you, the harder it is to ignore what I feel. And I can't just keep pretending like this isn't something real. The confession took me by surprise, and for a moment, I was at a loss for words. You were afraid, just like I had been. We both had these walls we were trying to keep up, afraid that if we let them down, everything would crumble. But here we were, both of us acknowledging the fear, acknowledging the risk. I'm scared too, I said, my voice steady but vulnerable. But I'm not going to run away from this. Not from you. I don't know what's going to happen, but I want to see where this goes. Together, bah. You reached for my hand then, the touch warm and steady. And for the first time, I realized that it wasn't the certainty of the future that mattered. It was the choice we made, every day, to stay in the moment and embrace what we had, no matter how uncertain the future might be. I'm with you, you said quietly, squeezing my hand, and just like that, everything felt a little lighter. The fear was still there, lurking in the background, but it no longer had a hold on us. We had chosen to face it together, and that made all the difference. As we continued our walk through the park, the stars above us seemed to shine a little brighter. The path ahead might have been unclear, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were exactly where we were supposed to be, together. There's a moment in every relationship when the chaos of uncertainty finally quiets, when the future no longer feels like an impossible puzzle, but a road with potential. A road you're willing to walk down together. For us, that moment didn't come in a grand, sweeping revelation. It came softly, in the quiet of an ordinary evening, in the way we held each other, in the way we finally allowed ourselves to trust that whatever came next would be enough. We had been through so much in the time we had known each other. The unspoken fears, the hesitation, the walls we built between us only to have them crumble as we discovered more about one another. But the most unexpected part was how we had become each other's safe space. It wasn't the perfect solution to everything, but it was real. And that was the only certainty we needed. It was another evening, several months after our conversation in the park, that we sat together on the same bench by the fountain. The one where we had shared our first true conversation, where everything had started to change between us. The world around us had grown quieter, the city still and hushed as the night settled in. It was the perfect end to a busy day, a calm after the storm of everything we had been learning about each other. The air was cooler now, crisp, and the lights in the park flickered as they reflected off the water. For the first time, we were here without hesitation, without lingering doubts. It was as if everything that had once seemed uncertain had been made clear, not by any grand revelation, but through the simple act of living it, of existing day by day together. I looked over at you, watching the way the light danced in your eyes, the way you seemed at peace, and I couldn't help but smile. You looked back at me, that familiar glint of affection behind your gaze. "This is nice," you said quietly, your voice gentle in the stillness. "It feels like we've finally found a place where we fit." I nodded, feeling the truth of your words settle in my chest. It wasn't that everything had been easy or perfect. It wasn't that we had figured it all out. But somehow the chaos we had feared in the beginning no longer seemed like something we had to fight against. It had become a part of us, woven into the fabric of what we were building. And in that, there was something beautiful. "I think I've been waiting for this moment for a long time," I said, my voice a little softer than usual. Waiting for a time when we wouldn't be afraid of what was coming next, when we could just be. You took a deep breath, your expression thoughtful. "I think we both were," you said, as if you were admitting a secret you hadn't known you were holding on to. "But now that we're here, I realize that it's not about having everything figured out. It's about being okay with not knowing, about trusting that the other person is right beside you, no matter what happens." It was so simple, but so profound. The weight of the words didn't hit immediately, but it lingered, sinking deep into me as I realized that you had finally understood what I had come to learn. That there was no such thing as a perfect, smooth path in life. No perfect script for how things should unfold. There was only the choice to stay, to walk forward, and to trust that the steps we took together would be enough, no matter where they led. We sat there for a while, the sound of the water filling the space between us as we enjoyed the quiet, the stillness. It felt natural, like this was where we were always supposed to be. And though the world around us continued on, people coming and going, life moving forward, it felt as if time had stopped just for us, as if everything had come full circle. But in the back of my mind, I knew we hadn't reached the end of anything, not really. This wasn't the final chapter of our story. It was simply the beginning of a new understanding, a new phase of our connection. What we had been through, the challenges we had faced, had brought us to this moment of clarity. And now, we could move forward not with the weight of uncertainty, but with the freedom to grow, to change, and to continue weaving this thread between us. And then, just as I thought I couldn't be more certain, you looked at me and asked the question I hadn't realized was still lingering in the air. "Do you think we're ready for what comes next?" You asked, your voice barely above a whisper. The question hung there, delicate and fragile, like a single thread about to unravel. It wasn't just about the next step in our relationship. It was about the future, about everything we had yet to face. And for the first time, I didn't feel a rush to answer. I didn't feel the need to overthink it, to anticipate the possible outcomes. I just knew. "I think we've always been ready," I said finally, my voice steady and clear. "Maybe not in the way we thought we would be, but we're ready in the only way that matters. Together." You smiled then, a soft, relieved smile that reached your eyes, and I felt the last of the distance between us fall away. There was no more second guessing, no more questioning. There was just this. Just the certainty that whatever happened, we would face it side by side. As we stood up from the bench, hand in hand, I realized that the road ahead was never going to be perfectly paved. There would still be twists and turns, moments of doubt, but the beauty was in knowing that we didn't have to walk it alone. Whatever came next, we had built something stronger than just a connection. We had built a bond that could withstand the storms and thrive in the calm. And that was enough. We walked away from the fountain, the lights of the park casting shadows along the path, the quiet stillness of the night surrounding us. The world was moving on, but for us, this was enough. This was everything. The thread between us had woven itself into something unbreakable, and as long as we held on, I knew we would always find our way. Together. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.